Welcome to Generational Trek, a Star Trek The Next Generation podcast with your hosts, Taylor Anderson
and Nicholas Anderson.
Generational Trek is a podcast of a dad and a son doing a series watch of Star Trek The Next Generation. In each episode, we'll provide a very brief recap of the episode. We'll then go through the episode, highlighting interesting parts of the episode, humorous portions, and looking for important takeaways. This is episode 3 of Generational Trek, and this week's episode is season 1, episode 6, Where No One Has Gone Before. And before we get too far into this, what we've decided to do is we're going to be skipping around a little bit. We're just going to be skipping some of the episodes in Next Gen just for the sake of time. And just really kind of picking through some of the best episodes of each season and watching those and talking about those. So that'll be what we'll be doing going forward from here. But this week's episode, Where No One Has Gone Before, its original air date was October 26th, 1987. Technically, if you're doing a watch on some of the streaming services, it's noted as episode 5, but it's actually episode 6 because the first episode was actually 2. Even though it was 2 parts and is generally shown together, is actually 2 episodes. But this week is from Memory Alpha. The short intro is when an experimental engine modification throws the Enterprise to the edge of the known universe. The crew must rely on a mysterious alien to guide the ship home. So, with that, we'll get into the episode. So what... Any first initial thoughts?
So the real question is, why does the alien, or rather, why does
the Traveler or Kaczynski?
Yeah. Okay, so why is Kaczynski? Why does he have the Traveler as his assistant, and where did he find him?
Well, that's a good question. I don't know that we find that out how Kaczynski and the Traveler kind of got hooked up. They kind of allude to it in the episode, but they don't actually ever really kind of talk about it. But more to the point, what I'm curious about is what were your overall, before we get into kind of some of the nitty gritty of the episode, what were your overall thoughts on the episode?
I think it was very good. I really like how Star Trek explains how, kind of explains a lot of surreal stuff that you wouldn't think about normally. And I think that's kind of what makes the series special, especially with this, since we know nothing really outside of... we only know probably 1% of the known universe, if even that, at the moment. So, we really don't know what could be out there.
Yeah, this is an interesting episode because this is a very, very big idea type of an episode. We get to travel 1 billion light years from home to the edge of the universe, or some unknown even part of the universe that causes things to happen that just think about it and you see. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those sequences in a minute. But yeah, this one's a good one because it's a very thoughtful based episode. It's a really good episode, especially for season 1, which was trying to find its footing for the new Star Trek. So I think that's some good thoughts on what makes Star Trek so interesting. One of the cool things, we see an Excelsior class, the USS Fearless, in the opening shot that's dropping off Mr. Kaczynski and the Traveler, or as he's known when he gets first dropped off, as Mr. K's assistant, from Tau Alpha C, which is some kind of mysterious planet. We don't know much about Tau Alpha C, but that's where he says he's from. And come to find out that Kaczynski thinks that he's got some special modifications he can make to the warp drive that they're coming there to test, and there seems to be a lot of doubt about. And one of the more humorous parts of this is this is before we get a true chief engineer on the Enterprise. Of course, LaForge will be the chief engineer at some point in the future. We'll get to that eventually, but here they have Chief Engineer Argyle, who has a bit of a Scottish accent, so a bit like Scotty from the original series. And so Chief Engineer Argyle, I don't know if that's because if that's his real name, or if that's just because maybe that's the sweaters he wears, some Argyle sweaters.
That's interesting. I didn't know that's what it was.
What's that?
The sweater name.
It's Argyle.
Argyle sweater.
It's interesting too, right? There's kind of a bit of a tell of what's going on in this episode right from the very start when the Traveler and Wesley talk, and you can tell that the Traveler is impressed by Wesley, like right off the bat, right before it even gets into the intro. So that'll become pretty important. So we travel to Galaxy M33. Are you familiar with this galaxy? Is that a real galaxy? You sounded like it.
Yes,
it's a real galaxy.
It is a real galaxy. It's kind of a smaller galaxy.
Yeah.
It's way beyond anything that we could ever reach. Of course, I haven't seen pictures of it, but I do know it exists.
Yeah. So apparently it's 2.7 million light years from home. And what I thought was interesting is that at maximum warp, data points out that it would take us 300 years to get home, or take the Enterprise 300 years to get home from Galaxy M33 at maximum warp. So you can almost do a quick, at maximum warp, they can go 300, or if you do the math, it's roughly 10,000 light years a year at maximum warp is about what Federation's most powerful ship, the Enterprise D, can travel. So it's not exactly that, but that's kind of interesting. So we kind of get a little bit of a information on the actual capabilities of the Enterprise there.
Right.
So I'm curious about this. This is an interesting statement that Wesley makes to the Traveler. And by the way, before I say this, what's up with the way that they treat Wesley on this ship? They keep calling him boy. And the child. What's the child doing there? I mean, this is supposed to be,
Yeah, it's like they almost like to berate Wesley.
And he's about your age. Actually, he's 15. I believe that's his age in the show. Is 15. I think that was his age in real life as well. But
interesting.
So you and Wesley are about the same age. But yeah, that got to be a little bit annoying. We kept calling him
boy.
I mean, it's you would think that in the future there'd be a little bit more
respect.
Yeah, a little bit more respectful of the youth than that. It seems to be less respectful of the youth than we are today. But anyway, so Wesley makes an important observation to the Traveler when they're sitting there working on the warp engines. He says, "Space. It's almost as if space, time, and thought aren't the separate things they appear to be." And the Traveler's taken aback by that statement, that space, time, and thought aren't the separate things they appear to be. So what do you think about that? That's a pretty high level statement, right? That space, time, and thought aren't the separate things
so
they appear to be.
Mostly, I'm assuming most people know already that space and time are already linked.
Sure.
That that's shown by when you travel closer to the speed of light, time speeds up, at least for the person, due to the sheer amount of time that it takes to travel. In fact, if you wanted to know, you moving actually makes you travel into the future by billionths of a nanosecond. So obviously no difference would be there basically. But if you travel fast enough, there will be a noticeable difference. Especially in the show, I don't know if it shows it or not, a lot of people, especially if they were traveling near warp 10, they would have to be way in the future at that point.
Well, I think the idea behind warp drive is that they're actually warping space as opposed to traveling, like literal traveling like we do in our car at 55 miles an hour.
Right.
That they're actually warping space so that that's why they don't travel into the future by traveling at these incredible speeds. Hence the name warp drive, is they're actually warping.
The real question is how
space. Well, the warp drive, there's some theoretical models on warp drive, and maybe we can spend an episode going through that. Maybe we can find somebody that we can bring in and that knows about warp drive and can kind of explain. Maybe we'll get a guest on the podcast at some point in the future, and
that'd be really cool
about it. That would be interesting to talk about warp drive and what that actually is and looks like and how that actually works. So yeah, I think that's kind of cool. I mean, saying that space, time, and thought aren't the separate things they appear to be. So we know that space-time is really kind of one thing, but at thought. And so what happens is there are 2.7 million light years at Galaxy M33, and then all of a sudden they propel again, and now they've moved to 1 billion light years from home into this kind of purplish haze area it's got these 4 light things that are kind of moving around and disappearing, and so the crew starts to see things like whatever they're thinking about becomes reality. Worf sees a Targ, which is apparently a Klingon pet, which is in the show is just a pig with some sort of a
spinal exoskeleton,
some fur and some spikes on the back of it. And then Tasha. So this was kind of interesting too. We find out a little bit of backstory on Tasha. She has a tabby cat that is her pet, but in the place or colony that she's at has rape gangs, which I thought that's really terrible. We see her, with tattered clothing and looks to be pretty beat up, with a rape gang chasing her. And that was kind of more, obviously a little disturbing and unfortunate for her. And we'll learn a little bit more about her backstory in the future. What I thought was a really cool scene was Jean-Luc sees his grandmother who has made him tea, very strong tea. And it was a really kind of a cool moment to see Jean-Luc spend some time with his grandmother who's passed away and seems to be really enjoying seeing her again.
And Commander Riker comes in and ruins it.
Yeah. Yes. Riker kind of, Jean-Luc's having a special moment with his deceased grandmother, and Riker's kind of like, Captain? But it appears that, like what I said, what we think becomes reality.
So basically, at the end, most of what they're seeing only pertains to them. But there's one scene between Jean-Luc Picard and another member of the USS Enterprise where both of them actually see the fire, but only the one guy puts it out, which I'm trying to figure out how in that moment did they both see the same thought.
Well, I think they could both. I think that if you were thinking it into reality, you could see it because Tasha had also saw the Targ from Worf. So I think that some people could see some of the stuff some of the time, but maybe not all the time. Yeah, it was a little,
because
was a little confusing.
Commander Riker didn't see his grandma.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. Now, at that point, you said that sometimes your mind goes against your thoughts. What did you mean when we were watching the show? What did you mean by
I don't know. That? My mind is an interesting place. I wouldn't say it's probably the best. It's just, I don't know. Sometimes there are thoughts of mine that I don't even feel like I think, and they just kind of pop into my head. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's really weird.
I would say that you're normal. We all have random thoughts that come into our mind and don't quite understand why they showed up. So, and yes, sometimes our minds go against.
And especially, if someone tells you to not think about something,
right?
Like the first thing you think about is what you're supposed to not think about.
Right. Like if I tell you to not think about pink elephants, the first thing you do.
You think about pink elephants.
Think about pink elephants. There's a pink elephant in your head. It's kind of funny. One of the comments I thought was kind of interesting. I'm curious what you thought about this. Is he says a thought is the basis of all reality.
There is some things that could be linked to some things. I guess kind of philosophy based, but at some point, there are things that are facts that you can't change with thoughts. Mm-hmm. Like. The computer that we're recording on right now is a computer and is not it's not like a living being, so it can be the basis for all reality. I don't think it's the basis our thoughts are not the basis for reality. Mm-hmm. Perhaps a higher being. Kind of depressing, but at the same time maybe that's why we live so short in time, because we only live to usually, 70 to 100 years. And, the universe has existed for over 14 billion years, Mm-hmm. It's kind of depressing to think how short our lives are. We only exist in the blink of an eye for the universe,
That's true, and especially in this current time with a global pandemic due to COVID-19 occurring, and
I know we're gonna get demonetized now.
so many people living in fear, and we have such a short amount of time here, regardless of what happens with a virus or not, that we should probably not take that time and live in fear. We should probably take that time to actually live and be smart about how we live, but
I
still
agree.
live. What was interesting too, getting back to the show, Riker asks the traveler why you have not been to see us before, because they figure out that the traveler is not really from a specific place, but really from some place in the future or some time in the future or something like that. And
I'm thinking he's from like an alternate universe, or rather, kind of like a higher race of beings.
yeah,
Star Trek is kind of weird that way. It's got like a hierarchy of beings. Well, I mean, actually, that's what we have, but
right. Yeah, we get the aliens. Now we get to see folks from other places and times. But
true.
he says up until now, of course, now on the Enterprise, which is the 24th century, he said up until now we were uninteresting. Were you insulted?
I mean, yeah.
Was 2020 you insulted?
I mean, when you think about it, I mean, we've made so much progress in probably the last 200 years. Of course, if someone's so advanced, and we just kind of look like cavemen to them, I can see why we're uninteresting. But at the same time, if we're making so much progress, what is there to say that we aren't interesting? Because I think more than being very advanced, being interesting, I think is making a lot of progress.
Yeah, we've made a lot of progress. We have a lot of progress to make, but we have made a lot of progress.
Especially in a very short time. I mean, think about it. In just 100 years, we've basically made everything for modern living. Only in the last 100 years, and humans themselves have existed for at least a million. Although, yeah, the modern era has been about 10,000 years. But think about that, even. I mean, what, maybe, I think staying at home farming, kind of when we decided to stop hunting and gathering,
right?
That was about 2 to 3,000 years ago. I mean, think about that. The modern era is 10,000 years long, and really, modern stuff has only been happening for 2 to 3,000 years.
A blink of an eye in terms of time, right? Well, as the show wraps up, the traveler pulls Captain Picard aside and talks to him about how special Wesley is, that he needs to encourage him without interfering. That he can't. That the traveler kind of alludes to the fact that Wesley is someone who is otherworldly, or perhaps operating on a different level as a human than most humans, intellectually and philosophically and that sort of thing. And I thought that was interesting that the traveler acknowledges that and talks to Picard about that, and that Picard hears him, doesn't dismiss him. I thought that was kind of cool. And then go ahead.
Okay. Well, see, because he isn't boy, he listens to him.
Yeah, I'm hoping that's the end of the calling Wesley boy and treating him that way. Picard, I think, finally acknowledges, or perhaps understands, what Wesley's capabilities are, because we closed the show out with Picard promoting Wesley to an acting ensign so that he can serve on the bridge of the Enterprise. And so it'll be interesting to see what Wesley's journey is from here, and where he goes. I think that will be an interesting exploration. But anyway, that takes us to the end of the episode. Any other thoughts on there?
I'd like to say, from what I previously said, although a thought cannot determine already reality, I believe that a thought can determine future reality. And I can say, a lot of billionaires, started with just a thought.
Yeah.
And, when that turned into reality, that's something that changed the world. So definitely thoughts are, I believe, the basis of reality, or at least the basis of our future.
That's very good. Yeah, I would completely agree with that. I think, yeah, without a doubt, a thought can shape the future for sure.
Now the real question is,
Right.
so the speed of thought, is
Uh-huh.
that what he moved at? And if so, how's that beat kind of the warp capabilities of warp 10, which is theoretically the fastest speed?
Yeah, I don't know. Somehow he was able to use that, as they said, space, time, and thoughts into one, and he was able to move the Enterprise through space and time without, through space at zero time.
I mean, if I'm not mistaken, they arrived at the same time.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah, that's what he said when they brought him back back to here to our current space, and
So
they said that they got there at the exact moment that they had left. So that entire time sequence, however long that actually was
yeah,
to them, it didn't actually happen in time, but it did happen in thought and in space, but not time.
so that begs the question then, do they come back on board again? Like what's his name?
Kaczynski.
Yeah, Kaczynski and his assistant. Did they come back? Did they come back
No,
on board at that?
that's a good question. I don't. Yeah, that's.
And if so, does that start a time loop of which they always know what's going on?
It's a good question. Well, they were aware of what happened.
Yes, I know
So,
that, but I don't think anyone else is though, right? And maybe perhaps they can probably break it first time by just saying, what happened.
hmm yeah, I don't think so because I think the Traveler has moved on. He's gone now.
Also, the real question is like, what happened to him?
To the Traveler?
Yeah, every time it said that they said that he wasn't doing well, but I don't think he was actually injured.
No, well, I think that must be very
Strenuous.
physically and mentally strenuous. Yeah, to move
Mm-hmm.
a starship a billion years in space, a billion light years in space, and yeah, that's a good question. I don't know. You got any other thoughts? Any other?
Um, no, but actually, yes. Okay, so a billion light years out.
Right.
How does that determine thought, or rather, what thought is reality at that point? Like, what? How does distance like that work, or is there just something in that area that we maybe perhaps it was something that no one was ever meant to reach? You know,
Mm-hmm.
but
Well,
I
who
think
knows if they actually maybe who knows if they actually went there? How was it not? Maybe the Traveler had the ability to just put that into everyone's mind. Do we even know that the Enterprise
moved. Yeah,
moved?
I mean, at this point, this is what Star Trek is good for.
Mm-hmm.
Is just these philosophical moments, that
Mm-hmm.
you really never know the answer to, but is always something to think about.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes this series special.
Yeah, I agree. Gives you something to think about. Very good. Anything else?
No,
All
I
right.
think I'm done.
All right. Well, that wraps it for this episode of Generational Trek. We'll be back soon, hopefully.
Indeed.
And until then, live long and prosper, and we will talk to you soon.